You believe the Bible? I mean, I believe what it says, that Jesus was the Messiah, that he died and rose again for the forgiveness of sins. No. I mean, you don't know? Know what? Dude, the Bible has been edited, lost, corrupted, maybe changed hundreds, if not thousands of times throughout history. Okay, what do you mean by that? Okay, firstly, the original Old Testament was written in Hebrew, but the authors of the New Testament all spoke Aramaic, right? Yeah. Okay, well, they wrote the New Testament in Greek, and they quote the Old Testament all the time, so immediately we have a translation of a translation of a translation. Okay. Well, their books were then translated into Latin, and then from Latin into German, and then German into English, so immediately you've got a translation of a translation of a translation of a translation of a translation. Okay, I get it. What's your point? My point is, it's like when you run a sentence through Google Translate 100 times. You end up with something entirely different from what you started with. Ergo, you can't trust anything the Bible says because you don't know what it said originally. Okay, hold on. To your first point, what makes you think that the authors of the New Testament only spoke Aramaic? I mean, sure, Aramaic was the common language of the people at the time in that region, but they would have been surrounded by Greek speakers constantly and would have heard Hebrew from synagogue every week. So more than likely, they were bilingual. Well, so if they knew multiple languages, which seems likely, wouldn't the whole problem just disappear? Well, hold on. Furthermore, to your second point, modern translators have access to thousands of ancient manuscripts in a bunch of ancient languages. So at most, you're going from one ancient language, like Greek, to English, not a translation of a translation of a translation. Okay, well now you've revealed a different problem. What do you mean? You said yourself there are thousands of copies of the New Testament in various languages, but do you have the originals? Well, no, we don't. Not for any of the books? No, only copies. Well, then how can you know whether or not it matches the originals? For all you know, it's been changed 600 times. Okay, well, it's true that we don't have the originals. We actually have something better. What could be better than the originals? Firstly, even if we did have the original, how would we know? What method would we use to confirm that? Exactly. But second of all, we have so many thousands of copies that if any one of them stood out in such a drastic way, and all the other hundreds all agreed with each other, we'd know which one was edited. And these ancient manuscripts have been recovered from all over the place, from Egypt, Israel, Rome, Greece, Turkey, and they all pretty much agree with each other with some minor differences. Exactly, differences. But what you failed to mention is there are hundreds of thousands of these differences, nearly 400,000 across 5,800 manuscripts. That means there are more corruptions in the manuscripts than there are words in the New Testament by nearly 3 times. Meaning what? That you can't trust the New Testament. Those corruptions are all over the place. How can you know anything for certain? Okay, when you use the word corruption and when modern textual critics use the word corruption, they mean 2 entirely different things. Okay, explain. It's true, textual critics have found right around 400,000 variants in the manuscripts, but what they mean is any deviation at all between manuscripts. So things like spelling differences, which doesn't affect meaning, or word order, which in Greek doesn't affect English translation, or scribal errors, like slips of the pen or clearly writing the wrong word. All these things count as corruptions. Okay, still, out of 400,000, how many of those corruptions are there? About 99% of them. What? Yeah, 99% of the corruptions we see in these manuscripts are things that don't matter when it comes to translation. Okay, well, what about the ones that do? Surely out of 4,000 corruptions, there's gotta be something that affects the text. Nope. According to Bart Ehrman, one of the most famous New Testament critical scholars, not a single one of Christianity's doctrines is affected by manuscript corruption. Well, I heard that a bunch of shady, bearded white monks decided which books of the Bible were gonna be included, and they had to fight to make sure all these hundreds of other gospels weren't included, hundreds of years after all these books were written. That is laughable. Wait, why? Because the church was massive and was spread out across thousands of miles into very diverse cultures from nearly its inception in the 1st century. So there was no one centralized authority that could look out at all the other churches and say, here's the books that we say are the approved ones. But yet if you look throughout church history at the writings of the church fathers, no matter where in the empire, they're all affirming the same 27 books of the New Testament that we have today. They all independently came to the conclusion that these 27 were the right ones. No church was fighting for, say, the Gospel of Thomas to be included. But what about the Council of Nicaea? I heard that that's where all the books of the Bible were decided upon hundreds of years later. No, canonicity was well established by then. Even though it was a small minor point at the Council of Nicaea, the vast majority of the council was to discuss the deity of Jesus. Whatever, man. All this stuff about Jesus dying and rising from the dead and healing people, doing magic tricks, it's all myths and legends anyway, right? Now, given everything we've talked about, what gives you that idea? I mean, easy. All these Gospels were written decades, if not centuries after anyone who knew Jesus had died. Isn't that well enough time to develop myths and legends about him? Sure it would be. if it were true that the Gospels were written many centuries after the life of Jesus. But in reality, we have early manuscripts from even the latest of the Gospels, the Gospel of John, dating all the way back into 90 CE. If Jesus was murdered in 30 CE, it's very possible that only 60 years afterwards there'd be plenty of people who were still alive who had witnessed this. And furthermore, since we know that John was written last, Matthew, Mark, and Luke all had to have been published and circulating well before 90 CE, which makes it even more likely that eyewitnesses were alive during the time of Jesus and could confirm if these gospel accounts were false. Yeah, but come on, man. Dead people stay dead. Isn't it more reasonable to assume that they made the whole thing up? I mean, sure, it would be more reasonable if the evidence didn't point to it. Evidence? What evidence? Glad you asked. Check out our bio for the video, The Evidence for the Resurrection of Jesus Christ.